Grab your Bibles. It is so great to be with you this morning. This is very much long awaited. And I think I got away without the clicker. Is it there in the pew? Yeah. All right. So if you don't know, we are in the middle of a move. And I was looking for a picture online that kind of helps me to describe what I'm currently feeling. So if I misspeak this morning or don't seem as well polished, this is my excuse. Many of you showed up yesterday to help us unload a truck that never came. It was supposedly broke down in San Antonio, and supposedly will be here sometime on Tuesday. So we'll see if and when that truck shows up. But we are doing our best to settle in, and me and my family want to offer our sincerest thank you and appreciation to the congregation for helping us to feel welcomed and loved as we begin our time to not only work with you all, but to join this body and to become part of this family. I've enjoyed watching the services online since we came that first time and keeping up with what's going on, and we look forward to continuing to get to know you all. Because we have the 4 kids with us, it's a little harder for us to get around and talk with everybody and visit with everyone. But know that we want to do that, so please come and talk to us and help us kind of get to know you, and we'll seek to get to know you as best as we can. This next week is Vacation Bible School. Because we are in a season, it seems, of just going with the flow, and things kind of came up last week and we're like, nah, let's not do that. So this next week is Vacation Bible School, which has given us kind of the chance to catch our breath, which is great because we wanted to be here sooner than we have been. And but that also brings with it some challenges. I think some people aren't going to be able to be there that could have been here the last week. So if you're able to help, please see Claudine. Let her know what you're able to do. She'll let you know what she needs done, and we'll show up on Monday morning and we will make it happen, and we'll just go with the flow, because that's just how life is. The opportunity we have this next week is to touch the hearts and the minds of young children, which is a wonderful opportunity. My wife has spent many an hour looking through children's Bibles, so that we would have one that would aid us in our story times each evening to share with our kids the truth that is in God's Word. And it's interesting to look at the stories and how they're portrayed in these children's Bibles, right? These stories that are often not meant for children sometimes will appear in these Bibles, and they're kind of, made smaller. They're kind of dumbed down a little bit. But I think it's important that we remember that the Bible is made for all ages, especially for us adults. And the things that are written herein and recorded for us are not always pretty. So this next week, as we have these stories that we tell the kids, and as we teach them these lessons from the Bible, it's important to remember that these are not kid stories. We're going to be teaching these to kids. We're going to be doing this age appropriate, but these stories are beneficial for us, and it's important that we go back to those. So I thought it was appropriate, since we're getting ready to do Vacation Bible School this next week, that my lesson be centered around Vacation Bible School. Also, this is one of the few lessons that I could access on my email, since my hard drive is on a truck somewhere, hopefully in San Antonio. The memory verse and the story that I'm basing this lesson off of is off of day 2, which is Tuesday, when the truck should be here. And the memory verse for that week is, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your path straight." I think that's a wonderful verse for us to think about and to contemplate. And the passage that we had read here just a few minutes ago was grabbed when I was trying to locate what this memory verse was, because I brought my materials back up to the office. I was like, what was that? So I got on YouTube, and what they had was that Romans 12. And I was like, oh, that's great. That's a great passage. And it really also captures this same concept. But the story that is paired on Tuesday with these two passages is the story of Daniel and his three friends and their difficulty being in a new land. Right? So this is an interesting story, and I think it's important that we understand how they got there. Because if we don't understand this background, we're not going to understand the gravity of what these young men did. Israel was, to some extent, especially Jerusalem, was at its climax to some extent, culturally, from a progressive standpoint at this time in history. The upper classes of society really had it made in the shade, as it were. But that also meant that the lower classes were suffering at the injustice and the corruption of the day. Now, Daniel and his friends found themselves in the upper aunts of society. They really were from these wealthier families, these families that had connections, these families that were well connected. And it was because of the injustice of Israel at the time and all of the corruption that was amongst this leading class in Israel, and because of the lack of godliness amongst the people in general, that God said enough is enough. And he allowed Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar to come and to destroy and capture Jerusalem. And he then carried off this upper class of Israel and left the lower classes. And he carried them off to Babylon. So here's these young men who have lived a fairly easy life up to this point, and now they find themselves thousands of miles away in a foreign land with not a whole lot going for them. Did I go the right direction? So these young men find themselves being called and picked out of this group. Right? They're picked out of this group, and they're put into the training program of Babylon to become leaders for Babylon. They're going to go through the indoctrination program that Babylon has created in order to make them good Babylonian leaders. Somebody that their people can relate to and understand, and who can then serve the wishes of the king. So they're going to teach them the language and the literature of the Babylonians. They're going to teach them the wisdom of Babylon. They're going to become the wise men of Babylon, the astrologers, those who understand all the unknowable things for most people. And along the way, one of the first things that they do is they give them new names. Alyssa really likes names. So Daniel means God is my judge. His name is changed to Belteshazzar, meaning Baal protects the king. So his name goes from meaning God is my judge to being Baal protects the king. So his identity is being changed every time he's addressed as he's sitting there in classes. Right? Hananiah's name, meaning God's grace, is changed to the moon god of the Babylonians. Right? And this idea that the command of the moon god, the command of Akah. Right? Micheal, whose name means who is like God, which basically is what my name means. My wife reminds me there's a question mark at the end. Right? It's not who is like God, right? It's, well, who is like God, right? I'm supposed to draw people to him. So try to keep that in mind. But instead of who is like God, who's like the moon god? Who's like Akah? I'm probably butchering this, but none of you guys probably know how to pronounce it properly. So if you do, come tell me. right? And then Ahaz, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, sorry. Azariah's name means the Lord is my help. The Lord is my lifesaver. He's the one who protects me. And now his name is changed to Abednego, servant of Nabah, the God of wisdom. Right? So their identities are changed in this process. And they're being reminded of this every time they're in class. They're in a new land. They don't have any of the power. They're being taught all this new stuff. Their worldview is being changed. Their worldview is being challenged. And then there's this scene that they're set down at a table every evening and they're given food from the king's table. They're blessed with this rich bounty upon which they should feed their bodies, which shall feed their minds, and allow them to grow and be well nourished. But there's a problem for Daniel and his friends. The food has been sacrificed to these gods. This food is also not necessarily in line with the kosher food laws. There's bacon on the table, and it smells so delicious, but they're not supposed to eat it. So Daniel resolves not to defile himself with the king's choice food. The names that these young men have been given indicate that it's possible that they are not coming from all the corrupt families that have led to Israel's downfall, but that they are actually coming from some of the families that are faithful to Yahweh, faithful to God, and want to see God's ways upheld. And they find themselves in this place where it would be very easy for them to say, you know what? I'm just going to go along to get along. I'm going to keep my head down. I'll hold my faith personally. But instead, they resolve, I'm not going to do what I know I should not do, what God calls me not to do. But I think it's also worth noting, these young men who have absolutely no power in this situation, how they respond in a godly way to this resolve that they have. They go to the servant who is the one providing them the food, who is overseeing their education at this point. They go to him and they say, we can't eat this food. We just want to eat water and vegetables. Now understand that the point of this diet has nothing to do with what is better or not better when it comes to eating. Go have a donut, right? It's okay. Eat some bacon. Come over to my house. We'll eat some bacon once I get my pots and pans again, right? This conversation, this passage has absolutely nothing to do with what is your best diet to eat. It has everything to do with who are you faithful to? How are you resolved in your faith to live out your faith according to what God has called you to do? And they go in humility and they say, we can't eat this. And this man is responsible for these young men prospering, looking well nourished, growing and succeeding in this program. And he says, I'm afraid of the king. If I give you only food, your food is only water and vegetables, you're going to be malnourished, and it's my head. Well, Daniel thinks about that for a second and says, well, how about this? Test us for 10 days. Don't do it for the whole time. Test us just for a short period of time and see at the end of that 10 days whether or not that is true or not. Well, I guess he was convincing enough, and the servant allows this. And at the end of the 10 days, they find that they are better nourished than all the other men in the program. So he allows it. They continue in this. Then, of course, we fast forward to the end of this, and the king finds that they are well nourished, but more than that they are wise and understanding, and he puts them in charge of great points of responsibility because they have exceeded in this program. Now, once again, the point is not that these men were healthier and better nourished because they were eating this diet. Right? There's books out there in Christian bookstores about the Daniel diet. That's not the point of the story. It has absolutely nothing to do with the point of the story. In fact, the point of the story is God is the one who blessed these men with health in spite of what they were eating. Right? That's the point. The point is not that he had wisdom and knew the better diet. That's not the point. The point is that God blessed these young men with favor and with prosperity because they were faithful in something small. They were faithful in something small. Daniel, of course, rises to great positions of authority and responsibility within the Babylonian and then the Medo-Persian dynasties. Right? And he becomes a man who is very well respected and maybe even despised for his character and his ability to lead well. And the same thing, I think, goes for Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. We don't often, it's hard to tell. Daniel seems to take the lead in this story. And his friends seem to just kind of go along with the ride. I don't know if that's true or not. But I want us to think about the result. This small act of faith, this small act of respect and standing firm in their beliefs, put them in a position of leadership, put them in a position of prosperity to do well for themselves in this foreign land, to navigate both holding on to their faith in God and also understanding the culture in which they were in. But then we get to this other point in history where the king, full of himself, makes this huge statue. And he says, I'm going to have all the instruments in the land make a huge sound. The horn, the zither, the lyre, all of these different instruments are going to sound. And at the sound that it makes, we want everybody to fall down and worship the idol. And anyone who doesn't is going to die. Got a decision to make. Daniel finds a way, apparently, it would seem, to be out of town on business. Right? Because there's nothing mentioned about Daniel. We know he's around, but he doesn't seem to be present at this event. But these three men have a choice to make. Am I going to stand up or am I going to kneel? What am I going to do? Am I going to stay firm to my faith in God and to what I know to be true, or am I going to yield to the king? And they decide to stand firm. And all the instruments sound, and everyone hits their knees, and then there's these three heads standing up. You can almost, picture their friends, hey, time to kneel, did you not hear? Right? But they stand firm. Of course, the report comes back to the king. King's angry. And then he realizes, these are guys I trust. These are guys I've depended on for years. And he says, you know what? Maybe you just didn't hear. Maybe you didn't understand. He explains it again, and he says, I'm going to have everybody play again. And he turns over, and he's like, all right, let's play all the instruments. And it's interesting what then happens. These three men say, King, we need you to know something. They say, and we need to listen to both the firmness in these men's voice, but we also need to hear the respect and the commitment in their voice. They say, we don't need to give you a defense in this matter. The king's like, yeah, you do. Right? Like, I am the judge. Like, I've given this law. You have broken it. I'm trying to give you some grace here. You should bow down. They say, no, we don't need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. The God we serve is able to rescue us from your hand. Our God is able to do what we need done to keep us safe from your punishment. We don't have to defend ourselves before you in this matter. But they say, but even if God chooses not to protect us from your punishment, even if we do have to go to the flames, even if we are consumed by them, We want you to know, O king, that we will neither bow down nor worship the God you have set up. These young men have determined that they are willing to do what they believe is right, regardless of the circumstance, regardless of the cost. They're not demanding their rights. They're not seeking an appeal. They simply state, we're going to do this, and we understand what the consequences may be, and we know that God can save us, but we know that He may choose not to. And regardless of which way it goes, we're going to do right. And then, of course, the part we love about the story. Right? Let's read this real quick, just so that you know that I'm not making all this up. Daniel chapter 3 here, Shadrack, Meshach, and Abednego, they answered the king. They said, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning furnace, and He will deliver us out of your hands, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image that you have set up. There's firmness, there's conviction, right? And there's respect. All those things are present in these men's response. The king's furious with their response. He orders the furnaces to be heated 7 times hotter than normal. He orders that they be bound and then thrown into the furnace, which they are. The strong men who picked these men up wearing their turbans, wearing their hats, wearing all their clothes, bound up and thrown into the fire, those men die from the heat of the furnace. Shadrack, Meshach, and Abednego fall into the furnace. They get up, the ropes are burned off, and they're walking around in the fire. And it's interesting to read, because Nebuchadnezzar goes, didn't we throw 3 men in? They go, yeah. Well, there's 4 walking around in there. Like, that's interesting. They're like, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out. And these young men walk out of the flames. Their turbans are not burned. Their clothes are not singed. Their hair is untouched. They don't even have the smell of smoke upon them. And God leaves no doubt who He is and whom they serve. And Nebuchadnezzar is the one who is then transformed by their actions. I think it's important to draw a straight line from what happened as these young men made their move to Babylon against their will, and as they stood firm in their faith in a small way, and how those small choices over times led them and built their faith up to the point that they were able to stand firm and state very clearly, we will not bow down. Consequences be what they may. But here we stand. It's the small acts of faith over time that get us to that point. You don't just wake up one day and have this faith that is so strong and this conviction, this fire in your eyes that's so intense that you can stand in the face of adversity. It begins with those small acts of faith, seeing God show up again and again and again. And then God's able to use you in this difficult situation which you're able to stand up under and to show His strength strong. Comes back to this passage that I found on the YouTube video of day 2 of Vacation Bible School, where this was the verse they decided to use for their memory work. I was like, oh, that's a great one, right? Do not be transformed or conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that by testing you may discern what the will of God is, what is good and acceptable and perfect. That's exactly what these young men did. They were not conformed to this world, but they were in the world. They were serving in government. They understood the culture in which they were in, and they knew how to communicate to those that they were leading the wisdom and the language of the Babylonians. But they were also able to stand firm in who God is, what God had taught them, what the will of God was. They were able by testing to discern that. And through the testing fires, in this case literal, the difficulties, they were able to stand firm because they had taken those little steps of faith over time to be ready to stand firm in this moment. And God used them in a tremendous way to transform the heart and the mind of King Nebuchadnezzar. So, as we head into next week and Vacation Bible School, and as we talk about these stories, the kids aren't going to get all those little points. But it's important that we wrestle with those. That we realize that it's in the small things that God is calling us to be faithful in. And that in those small things where God shows up and He shows Himself strong, He's building in us faith. He's building in us resistance. He's building within us an ability to stand under pressure so that we can be used by Him in great and mighty ways. And I think it's important that we also look at the example that Shadrack, Meshach, and Abednego, or Mishael, Azariah, and Hananiah, the example these men set for us. To stand firm upon our convictions, but to do so with respect, but to do so firmly. To be willing to take the consequences, be what they may, for our actions in standing firm to God. Not demanding our rights, not demanding that things change, but standing firm with kindness and respect. We do this, and we're called to do this in the way that we present the gospel message to our world, are we not? To present the truth of God to our world, but to do so with gentleness and respect. This is what I believe. This is what the Bible teaches. If I'm wrong, please show me. But this is what it says. And I'm going to do my very best to abide by it. This is what God is calling us all to do, and it has not changed since the time of Daniel and his friends. And it will be the same until the end. And if there's any way that we can help you to walk firm in your faith, if there's any way that we can encourage you in the difficulties that you're going under as you face the fiery furnaces of life, whether it's something small like your lawnmower is not working and you just need help dealing with that difficulty, or maybe it's that some moving truck just has not appeared yet. Whatever that challenge is, if you need the body of Christ, if you need that support, if you need that encouragement to walk through that difficulty, we're here. We're always here. But we have this special time that if you have a need, come. Let us know that as we stand and as we sing.